"You can't sit here. You don't look like you belong here." Those were the last words Cynthia Reynolds said before she made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was just yelling at a stubborn passenger in a hoodie. She thought her platinum status and her husband's money made her untouchable. She was wrong. When the airport security team dragged Marcus Sterling off Flight 492, they didn't know who he was. They didn't check his credentials. They just saw a man who didn't fit their narrative. But when the handcuffs clicked and the badge fell out of his jacket, the panic in the room was colder than the air conditioning. This isn't just a story about a seat dispute. This is what happens when entitlement collides with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And the karma? It wasn't just hard. It was nuclear. The humidity in Atlanta was stifling, a thick, wet blanket that clung to everyone walking through the jet bridge of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. But inside the cabin of Vista Airways Flight 492, the air was crisp, cool, and smelled faintly of sanitized leather and expensive cologne. Marcus Sterling sat in seat 2A. He was a man who specialized in being invisible, even when he was sitting in first class. He wore a charcoal gray hoodie, pulled up slightly to shield his eyes from the overhead reading lights, and a pair of faded denim jeans. To the untrained eye, he looked like a tired college student, or perhaps a musician trying to sleep off a tour. He didn't have the suit, the tie, or the polished leather briefcase that usually signaled first-class passenger. What he did have was a book, a worn paperback copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and a patience that had been forged in fire. Marcus adjusted his position, stretching his legs. He had been awake for 36 hours straight. The operation in Miami had been successful, but exhausting. The surveillance van had no AC, the coffee had been stale, and the takedown had been physically demanding. Now, all he wanted was to fly back to Washington, D.C., file his report, and sleep for a week. He watched the other passengers board. There was the businessman in 1B, already shouting into his Bluetooth earpiece about stock margins. There was the elderly couple in row 3, holding hands nervously. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the ambient noise of the plane wash over him. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, nasal. It cut through the low hum of the engines like a serrated knife. Marcus didn't move immediately. He assumed the person was talking to someone else. "Excuse me. I am talking to you." Marcus opened one eye. Standing in the aisle, looming over him, was a woman who looked like she had been manufactured in a factory that specialized in intimidation. She was wearing a bright, canary-yellow blazer that cost more than most people's cars, oversized sunglasses that she hadn't taken off despite being indoors, and she was gripping a Louis Vuitton carry-on as if it were a weapon. This was Cynthia Reynolds. She didn't just enter a room, she invaded it. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his voice low and raspy from disuse. "You're in my seat," Cynthia declared. She didn't check her boarding pass. She didn't look confused. She looked certain. Marcus glanced at the digital display above his head. 2A. He reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out his crumpled boarding pass, and checked it. 2A, Marcus said calmly, showing it to her. "I think this is me." Cynthia scoffed, a sound that involved a lot of air leaving her nose. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his sneakers, high-end, practical tactical boots that looked like hiking shoes, and his hoodie. "There must be a mistake," she said, turning her head towards the galley. "Steward, we have a situation." Marcus sighed. He knew this look. He had seen it 1,000 times in his career, usually right before he had to arrest someone for wire fraud or embezzlement. It was the look of someone who believed the rules were suggestions for them and iron bars for everyone else. "Ma'am," Marcus said, trying to de-escalate. "Please, I'm tired. The seat is assigned to me. If you check your pass—" "I don't need to check my pass," Cynthia snapped, her voice rising an octave. "I fly this route every Tuesday. I always sit in 2A. It's my seat. And frankly, it's obvious there's been a system error, because someone like you clearly isn't supposed to be up here." The cabin went quiet. The businessman in 1B stopped talking about margins. The elderly couple in row 3 froze. Marcus sat up straighter. The sleepiness vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, analytical focus. "Someone like me?" he repeated softly. "Yes," Cynthia said, waving a hand dismissively at him. "Upgrade errors happen. Staff travel errors happen. Look, I'm a Platinum Elite member. I need you to take your bag and go back to economy, where your actual seat probably is, so I can sit down. My husband is waiting for me in DC, and I have a headache." Marcus looked at her. He didn't blink. "I'm not moving." The tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to choke on. Cynthia Reynolds stood frozen for a second, her mouth slightly ajar. She wasn't used to the word no. In her world, no was just the start of a negotiation she would eventually win. "Greg!" she shrieked, turning around. From the front galley emerged Greg Thompson, the lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin. Greg was a man who prided himself on the sharpness of his uniform creases and the whiteness of his teeth. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and right now that smile was strained. "Mrs. Reynolds," Greg said, rushing over, his voice dripping with practiced subservience. "So good to see you again. Is there a problem?" "There is a massive problem, Greg," Cynthia said, pointing a manicured finger at Marcus. "This individual has stolen my seat, and he refuses to move." Greg turned his gaze toward Marcus. His demeanor shifted instantly. If his attitude toward Cynthia was warm honey, his attitude toward Marcus was ice water. He saw the hoodie. He saw the skin color. He saw the lack of visible deference. "Sir," Greg said, his voice dropping the customer service lilt and adopting a tone of authority. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." "I already showed it to her," Marcus said, keeping his hands on the armrests. "But sure." He handed the slip of paper to Greg. Greg snatched it, scanning it aggressively, looking for a flaw. He looked at the date, the flight number, the seat assignment. It was all correct. 2A. Paid in full. Federal government booking code, though Greg didn't recognize the specific alphanumeric sequence. Greg frowned. He handed the pass back, but he didn't apologize. He looked at Cynthia, who was tapping her foot impatiently. "Mrs. Reynolds, his pass does say 2A, Greg said quietly. "Don't be ridiculous, Greg," Cynthia hissed. "Look at him. Does he look like he paid $3,000 for a ticket? He's probably an employee using a buddy pass, or there was a glitch. I am Platinum Elite. You know, my husband, Richard Reynolds, owns the logistics firm that supplies this airline. Do you really want me to call Richard and tell him that I'm standing in the aisle because you couldn't handle a squatter?" Greg paled. The mention of Richard Reynolds was a trigger. Everyone knew the Reynolds family had pull. Greg turned back to Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to gather your things and follow me to the galley." "Why?" Marcus asked. "We need to verify your payment method and identity," Greg lied. It was a weak lie, but he was banking on Marcus being intimidated. "There is a discrepancy in the manifest." "The manifest is fine," Marcus said. "I'm a federal agent on transport. I'm not moving." Cynthia laughed out loud, a harsh, cackling sound. "A federal agent? You? Oh, please. What are you? The inspector of stolen car stereos? Greg, get him off this plane. I feel unsafe. He's lying, he's aggressive, and he's refusing to follow crew instructions." That was the magic phrase. refusing to follow crew instructions. In the post-9/11 world, those words gave flight crews godlike power. "Sir," Greg said, puffing out his chest, "you are disturbing the peace of the cabin. Mrs. Reynolds feels threatened. I am ordering you to vacate this seat immediately. If you don't, I will be forced to call the airport police." Marcus looked at Greg. He saw the fear in the man's eyes, fear of Cynthia, fear of his bosses, mixed with a deep-seated bias that made it easy for him to target Marcus. "Call them," Marcus said. "But I'm telling you right now, Greg, you are making a mistake that is going to cost you your career. Check the manifest again. Look at the code LEO priority. Do it before you make a call you can't take back." "I don't need to check anything," Greg snapped. "You're disrupting my flight. I'm calling the gate agents and security." Greg marched to the front of the plane and picked up the interphone. Cynthia smirked, leaning against the seat opposite Marcus. "You picked the wrong day and the wrong woman," she whispered to him. "You could have just gone to economy. Now you're going to jail." Marcus didn't respond. He just picked up his book, opened it to page 42, and waited. 5 minutes later, the peaceful hum of the plane was shattered by the heavy tread of boots on the jet bridge. 2 men entered the cabin. They were private airport security contractors, not actual police officers, though they wore uniforms designed to blur that line. Their badges said Secure Corp, but they carried zip ties and tasers on their belts. The lead officer, a man named Brad Lowe, was built like a vending machine, square, heavy, and immovable. He had a buzz cut and a face that suggested he enjoyed conflict a little too much. Behind him was a younger, nervous-looking guard named Timothy. "Where is he?" Brad asked, his voice booming. "Right there," Cynthia said, pointing like an accusation. "The one in the hoodie. He's threatening us." Greg the steward nodded vigorously. He refused to deplane. He claimed to be an agent, but refused to show ID when asked. He's being belligerent. This was a lie. Marcus had never been asked for ID by Greg, only the boarding pass. But Brad didn't care about the details. He saw a compliant flight attendant, a distressed wealthy woman, and a calm black man in a hoodie. The equation was simple to him. Brad marched up to seat 2A. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask for an explanation. "Up now!" Brad barked. Marcus looked up from his book. "Officer, I am a federal agent. My badge is in my jacket pocket in the overhead bin. If you let me stand up slowly, I can show you." "I said get up!" Brad yelled, reaching out to grab Marcus's arm. "Don't touch me," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "I am warning you. I am authorized to be here. Interfering with a federal officer is a felony." "You're not an officer, you're a trespasser," Brad sneered. He looked at the younger guard. "Grab his legs." "Sir, maybe we should check," Timothy started, looking uncertain. "Do it," Brad yelled. The passengers were watching in horror. The businessman in 1B had his phone out, recording. The young mother in 4A was clutching her child. Brad lunged. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his hoodie. Marcus, trained in hand-to-hand combat, had the reflex to break the man's arm instantly. But he knew the optics. If he fought back physically, he would be the aggressor in the news. He had to let them hang themselves. He went limp. Passive resistance. "Get him out of here," Cynthia cheered, clapping her hands. Brad and Timothy yanked Marcus out of the seat. Marcus's body hit the aisle floor with a thud. His book slid under the seat. "Stop resisting!" Brad screamed for the benefit of the cameras, even though Marcus wasn't resisting. They grabbed him by the arms and legs and began to drag him down the aisle of the first-class cabin. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said, his voice calm but strained as he was hauled backward. "Check my jacket, the black blazer in the overhead." "Shut up," Greg shouted. "Just get him off my plane." They dragged him past the curtain, through the economy section. People gasped. Phones were raised like a salute of black rectangles, recording every second. "Is that necessary?" a passenger in row 12 shouted. "He's not fighting you." "Stay back," Brad yelled, sweating now. He felt powerful. He was the hero, removing the threat. They reached the jet bridge door. With a final heave, they threw Marcus onto the carpet of the boarding tunnel. Brad kneeled on Marcus's back, driving his knee into the spine. "Stay down," Brad panted. He reached for his handcuffs. "You're done, buddy. You are so done." Marcus lay on the floor, his cheek pressed against the industrial carpet. He felt the cold steel of the cuffs clamp around his wrists. He waited until the click of the lock echoed in the tunnel. "Are you arrested?" Marcus asked from the floor. "Am I in custody?" "You bet your ass you are," Brad spat. "Assault on flight crew, trespassing, resisting arrest." "Good," Marcus whispered. "Now the clock starts." Greg the steward stepped out onto the jet bridge, holding Marcus's carry-on bag and his black blazer. He threw them onto the floor next to Marcus. "Here's your trash," Greg said. The blazer landed awkwardly. The lapel flopped open. And there it was. Clipped to the inside pocket of the jacket was a leather wallet that had fallen open upon impact. Inside was a heavy gold shield with the eagle on top, and below it the bold blue letters, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and next to it an ID card that read, Marcus Sterling, Assistant Director, Counter-Terrorism Division. Timothy, the young guard, looked down. His eyes went wide. His face lost all color. He tapped Brad on the shoulder. His hand was shaking. "Brad," Timothy squeaked. "Brad, look." Brad looked down. He saw the badge. He saw the rank, Assistant Director. That wasn't just an agent. That was the boss of the bosses. The silence that followed was heavier than the plane itself. Inside the plane, Cynthia Reynolds was sipping a glass of champagne, smiling in seat 2A. She had no idea that outside, the world was about to end. The silence on the jet bridge was absolute. It wasn't empty silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb that had just finished ticking but hadn't exploded yet. Brad Lowe, the massive security guard who had just driven his knee into Marcus's spine, stared at the badge lying on the carpet. The gold shield caught the harsh fluorescent light of the tunnel. The letters seemed to burn into his retinas. Assistant Director. Brad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His brain was trying to process the discrepancy between the man in the hoodie he had just assaulted and the credentials lying next to his dirty boot. "Timothy," Brad whispered, his voice trembling. Is that real?" Timothy, the younger guard, was already backing away, his hands raised as if he were surrendering to an invisible army. "It's real, Brad. That's federal issue. Oh my God, we just assaulted a Fed." Greg Thompson, the flight attendant, was still standing in the doorway of the plane, looking down at the scene with a sneer that was slowly curdling into confusion. He couldn't see the badge clearly from his angle. "What is the hold-up?" Greg demanded, checking his watch. "Drag him to the holding room so we can close the door. Mrs. Reynolds is waiting for her pre-flight meal." Marcus, still face down on the carpet with his hands cuffed behind his back, turned his head to the side. He spat a small amount of blood onto the carpet. He had bitten his lip when he hit the floor. "Brad," Marcus said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had changed. It was no longer the voice of a tired traveler. It was the voice of a man who commanded thousands of agents. "I want you to listen to me very carefully." Brad scrambled off Marcus's back as if he had been burned. He fumbled for the keys to the handcuffs on his belt. Sir, I didn't know. I swear to God. The steward said you were a threat. I was just following protocol. Let me get these off you." "Don't," Marcus barked. The command cracked like a whip. Brad froze, the key hovering inches from the cuffs. "Sir, do not touch me." Marcus said coldly. "You have assaulted a federal officer. You have deprived me of my civil rights under color of authority. You have kidnapped me from my seat. If you unlock these cuffs before the Atlanta Police Department arrives to process the scene, I will add tampering with evidence to your list of charges." Brad's face went grey. He looked at Timothy. Timothy shook his head vigorously. "I didn't touch him, Brad. You grabbed him. I just watched." "You helped drag him," Marcus corrected, his eyes sharp. "You're an accessory. Now stand back against the wall. Both of you." Greg finally stepped out of the plane, annoyed by the delay. He walked over and looked down at the badge. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide. He looked at Marcus, then back at the badge. That's a prop," Greg stammered, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "People buy those online. You're an actor or something, right? You can't be an assistant director. Look at your shoes." Marcus rolled onto his side, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. He looked up at Greg. "Greg," Marcus said, "my shoes are tactical reinforced polymer, designed for field operations. My hoodie covers a Kevlar vest I wear during transport. And that badge? That badge is older than you are. You judged me on my skin and my clothes, and because of that, you just ended your career and cost your airline about $50 million in lawsuits." "You're bluffing," Greg said, his voice high and shrill. "Brad, get him out of here. He's lying." "Touch me again, Brad," Marcus whispered, locking eyes with the security guard. "Go ahead, roll the dice." Brad didn't move. He was breathing hard, sweat pouring down his forehead. He knew. He knew in his gut that he had messed up royally. "Timothy," Marcus said, "reach into my blazer pocket. There is a cell phone. It's a secured government line. Hand it to me." "Don't do it," Greg shouted. Timothy ignored Greg. He moved like a zombie, terrified of disobeying the man on the floor. He fished out the phone and held it to Marcus's ear, his hand shaking so badly the phone vibrated against Marcus's head. "Unlock it," Marcus instructed. "Passcode 8819. Timothy typed it in. "Go to contacts. Find SAC Atlanta. That's the special agent in charge of the Atlanta field office. Hit dial." Timothy pressed the button and held the phone to Marcus's ear. It rang twice. "Sterling? Is that you?" A deep, gruff voice answered. "We expected you in D.C. by tonight. What's up?" "Agent Miller," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I'm at Hartsfield-Jackson, Gate B12. I have been assaulted and detained by private security and Vista Airways staff. I am currently handcuffed on the jet bridge. I need a tactical response team. I need the airport police, and I need the FAA to issue an immediate ground stop order for Flight 492. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that terrified Brad more than any scream. "Say that again, boss. You're handcuffed." "Affirmative. Aggravated assault, kidnapping, hate crime indicators. Send the house, Miller. I'm rolling now. ETA 3 minutes. Do not let that plane leave." "It's not going anywhere," Marcus said. "And neither are they." Timothy pulled the phone away, looking like he was about to throw up. Marcus looked up at Greg, whose arrogance had finally evaporated, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. "Run back inside, Greg," Marcus said. "Go serve Mrs. Reynolds her champagne. Tell her she's going to be here for a while." Inside the cabin of Flight 492, the atmosphere was confusingly calm. The passengers had seen the violence, but the heavy door of the plane had been shut, muffling the drama on the jet bridge. Cynthia Reynolds was settling into seat 2A. She felt triumphant. The riff-raff had been removed. The natural order of things had been restored. She adjusted her sunglasses and snapped her fingers at a passing junior flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah. "More champagne," Cynthia ordered, "and tell the pilot to make up for lost time. I have a dinner reservation." "Yes, Mum," Sarah said quietly. She was shaking. She had seen what happened to the man in the hoodie, and it made her sick. But she was too low on the totem pole to challenge Greg or a Platinum member. 2 rows back, in seat 4B, a man named David, a tech entrepreneur in his 30s, was watching Cynthia with disgust. He still had his phone in his hand. He had recorded everything. He had just hit upload to Twitter, X, tagging the FBI, the airline, and every major news outlet. The caption read, "Vista Airways just beat up a quiet passenger for a rich lady. Wait until you see who he is." The video was already at 10,000 views and climbing vertically. Suddenly, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Usually, the pilot sounded bored and confident. This time, he sounded confused. "Ah. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Halloway from the flight deck. We were, just about to push back, but ground control has just denied our clearance. We've been ordered to hold position. We're trying to get more information." Cynthia groaned loudly, throwing her head back. "Unbelievable! Greg, get out here! Why are we waiting?" Greg didn't come out. He was currently in the forward galley, hyperventilating into a paper bag. Outside, the situation was escalating from a misunderstanding to a siege. Blue lights began to flash against the windows of the terminal. Not just 1 or 2 cars. A fleet. Airport police cruisers screeched to a halt on the tarmac below the plane. Armored SUVs with blacked-out windows, the signature vehicles of the FBI, swarmed the gate area on the upper level. On the jet bridge, the door to the terminal flew open. It wasn't the gate agent. 6 officers from the Atlanta Police Department stormed onto the bridge, guns drawn, shouting, "Drop it! Hands in the air! Get on the ground!" Brad and Timothy dropped to their knees instantly, hands behind their heads. "Don't shoot!" Brad screamed. I'm security! You're a suspect!" an officer yelled. Behind the police came a tall man in a suit, followed by 4 agents wearing FBI windbreakers. This was Special Agent in Charge Miller. He saw Marcus lying on the floor, still cuffed, his cheek pressed against the carpet. Miller's face went red with rage. "Get those cuffs off him!" Miller roared at the police. "Now!" An officer rushed forward with a key, unlocking Marcus. Marcus sat up slowly, rotating his wrists. They were bruised and bleeding. He stood up, wincing as his back cracked. Miller grabbed Marcus by the shoulders. "Boss, are you okay? Do you need a medic?" "I'm fine," Marcus said, brushing off his knees. He looked at Brad, who was now being handcuffed by the real police. "Read him his rights. Full book." "You got it," Miller said. He turned to the terrified airline staff standing at the terminal door. "Who is the gate agent?" A trembling woman raised her hand. "Lock this bridge down," Miller ordered. "Nobody comes off that plane. Nobody goes on. That aircraft is now a crime scene." Marcus walked over to the plane door. He looked through the small porthole window. He could see the first-class cabin. He could see Cynthia Reynolds waving her empty glass in the air, mouthing angry words. Miller walked up beside him. "What do you want to do, Marcus? We can drag the security guys downtown, charge the steward. We can let the plane go." Marcus shook his head. "No. That plane doesn't leave. The pilot is complicit. He authorized the removal without verifying the threat. The steward instigated a false report. And the passenger—" Marcus's eyes narrowed. "The passenger incited a federal incident." "So, what's the play?" Miller asked. Marcus adjusted his hoodie. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his badge, clipping it onto his belt next to his holster, which he had retrieved from his carry-on. "We're going back inside," Marcus said. "I want to see her face when she realizes that her platinum status doesn't outrank the United States Department of Justice. You want backup? Miller smiled. Bring the team, Marcus said. And get the warrant. We're seizing the flight data recorder and the cabin surveillance video. Inside the plane, the confusion was turning into panic. The passengers could see the flashing lights reflecting off the wing. "Why are there police cars?" someone shouted from economy. Cynthia was standing now, shouting at the closed cockpit door. "Captain, I demand you take off. I know the CEO of this airline." The main cabin door opened. The sudden noise made everyone jump. The hiss of the pressurization seal releasing was followed by the heavy thud of boots. Cynthia spun around, ready to scream at the gate agent. "Finally! Tell these idiots to—" Her voice died in her throat. Standing in the doorway was Marcus Sterling. He wasn't being dragged this time. He was standing tall. Behind him were 4 armed FBI agents and 2 uniformed police officers. Marcus stepped into the first-class cabin. He looked at the empty seat 2A, his seat. Then he looked at Cynthia. The cabin went dead silent. "You," Cynthia whispered. "How did you get back on?" Marcus didn't yell. He walked slowly down the aisle until he was standing right in front of her. He pulled his badge from his belt and held it up, eye level with her. "Cynthia Reynolds," Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the plane. "I am Assistant Director Sterling of the FBI. You are being detained for inciting a violence on a federal aircraft, interference with a flight crew, and conspiracy to assault a federal officer." Cynthia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her face went from flushed red to ghostly white in a second. I didn't know. You were wearing a hoodie. You can't arrest me. My husband is Richard Reynolds." Marcus leaned in close. "Mrs. Reynolds, right now, your husband is the only person who might be able to bail you out, but considering the charges, I wouldn't count on it." He turned to the agents behind him. "Take her." As the agents moved in to handcuff Cynthia, she let out a scream that shattered the tension. But this time, nobody helped her. The businessman in 4B stood up and started clapping. Then the couple in row 3. Then the economy cabin. The applause grew into a roar as the queen of seat 2A was marched off the plane in steel bracelets, sobbing about her luggage. But Marcus wasn't done. He turned his gaze toward the galley, where Greg was hiding. "Greg," Marcus called out, "come on out. It's your turn." While Cynthia Reynolds was being processed in a federal holding cell, stripped of her jewelry, her phone, and her dignity, a different kind of storm was brewing outside. It was a storm made of pixels and public outrage. David, the tech entrepreneur from Seat 4B, had uploaded the video titled "Vista Airways Staff and Security Assault FBI Director for Looking Poor." By the time the sun set over Atlanta, the video had 45 million views. The footage was damning. It clearly showed Marcus sitting quietly, Cynthia berating him, Greg lying to the security team, and Brad brutally dragging a non-violent man down the aisle. The internet detectives went to work immediately. Within an hour, they had identified everyone. As a boycott Vista Airways was the _1 trending topic globally. The airline's stock plummeted by 18% in after-hours trading, wiping out nearly $1.2 billion in market value in a single afternoon. At the Atlanta FBI field office, the atmosphere was electric. Marcus sat in a conference room, an ice pack on his shoulder, giving his official statement. The door burst open. A man in a 3-piece Italian suit stormed in, followed by a frantic-looking lawyer. This was Richard Reynolds, Cynthia's husband. He was a man accustomed to buying his way out of problems. He looked like he owned the building, his face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from inconvenience, not concern. "Where is she?" Richard demanded, ignoring the agent standing guard. I want my wife released immediately. This is a misunderstanding. I have the police chief on speed dial." Special Agent Miller stepped forward, blocking Richard's path. "Mr. Reynolds, you need to lower your voice." "Don't tell me what to do," Richard spat. "Do you know who I am? My logistics firm moves half the cargo for this airport. I want the names of the officers who arrested Cynthia. I'm going to have your badges for coasters." Marcus stood up slowly from the table. He removed the ice pack. He walked over to Richard Reynolds. "Mr. Reynolds," Marcus said calmly. Richard sneered at him. "Who are you? The janitor?" Marcus didn't blink. "I'm the man your wife tried to have thrown off a plane because she didn't like my hoodie. I'm also the assistant director of the counter-terrorism division, and you are currently trespassing in a secure federal briefing room." Richard's face went slack. The arrogance drained out of him like water from a cracked bucket. He looked at his lawyer. The lawyer was pale, shaking his head slightly. "Stop talking," the lawyer mouthed. "Assistant director?" Richard stammered. "Your wife," Marcus continued, his voice hard as granite, "committed a felony on federal property. She didn't just break a rule, Richard. She broke the law, and because she decided to use the airline staff as her personal goon squad, 2 security guards are facing assault charges, and a flight attendant is facing conspiracy charges." Richard swallowed hard. "Look, surely we can settle this. A donation to the FBI Widows Fund, a substantial one." Marcus laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "This isn't a traffic ticket, Richard. This is the United States government. You can't buy us. In fact, we're opening an investigation into your logistics firm's contracts with the airport to see if any undue influence was used to secure Cynthia's platinum status perks." Richard Reynolds looked at Marcus, then he looked at the wall. He was a businessman. He knew when an asset had become a liability. He realized instantly that if he stood by Cynthia, his entire empire would be scrutinized by the FBI. He would lose everything. He turned to his lawyer. "Leave her." The lawyer blinked. "Sir." "I said leave her," Richard said, his voice cold. "I'm not going down for her entitlement. Tell the press we are separated. Tell them I condemn her actions. I'm not paying her bail." Richard turned and walked out of the room without asking to see his wife. When the agents told Cynthia that her husband had left the building and refused to post her bond, she didn't scream. She just slid down the wall of her cell and stared at the concrete floor. The reality of her karma had finally arrived. The fall from grace is rarely a straight line. For Cynthia Reynolds, it was a jagged, painful descent that hit every branch on the way down. 3 weeks after her arrest, Cynthia sat in a visitation room at the Fulton County Jail. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale desperation. She wasn't wearing her canary yellow blazer or her designer sunglasses. She was wearing an oversized orange jumpsuit that scratched her skin, and her roots were starting to show, a stark grey against the dyed blonde. She sat anxiously, waiting for the door to open. She expected Richard. She needed Richard. He was the fixer. He would have the best lawyers in the country. He would make this nightmare go away. The heavy steel door buzzed and clicked open. It wasn't Richard. It was a man in a sharp navy suit she vaguely recognized. Richard's corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling. No relation to Marcus, a cruel irony of names. He carried a briefcase, but he didn't sit down. He stood on the other side of the plexiglass, his face devoid of sympathy. "Where is he?" Cynthia asked, her voice cracking. "Where is Richard? Why hasn't he posted bail?" The lawyer opened his briefcase and slid a thick manila envelope through the document slot. "Mr. Reynolds is not coming, Cynthia," the lawyer said, his tone professional and cold. "He has instructed me to deliver these to you personally." Cynthia's trembling hands opened the envelope. She expected a legal strategy. She expected a plan. Instead, the bold letters at the top of the first document read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Cynthia stared at the paper. The words didn't make sense. Divorce? Now? But I need him. "Mr. Reynolds is distancing himself from the situation," the lawyer explained, checking his watch. "The federal investigation into your platinum status has triggered an audit of his logistics company. The board of directors is threatening to oust him unless he cuts ties with the source of the reputational damage. That source is you, Cynthia." "He can't do this!" Cynthia screamed, slamming her hand against the glass. "I did this for us. I wanted the seat so we could be comfortable. He owes me." "He owes you nothing," the lawyer replied, snapping his briefcase shut. "You have become a liability. The assets have been frozen pending the investigation. You have no access to the joint accounts. You will be represented by a public defender. Goodbye, Mrs. Reynolds." He walked out. Cynthia was left alone in the orange room, clutching the divorce papers, realizing that the hard karma wasn't just coming for her freedom. It was coming for her entire identity. The trial of United States versus Reynolds et al. Had become a media spectacle. The courtroom was packed to capacity every single day. The video of the incident had been viewed over 100 million times. Cynthia Reynolds had become the face of entitlement, a meme, a villain. But in the courtroom, it wasn't a meme. It was a slaughter. The prosecution, led by a ruthless assistant U.S. attorney named Sarah Jenkins, systematically dismantled the defense. First to the stand was Greg Thompson, the flight attendant. Greg had taken a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he had agreed to testify against Cynthia. He looked small on the witness stand, his once perfect hair messy, his arrogance completely evaporated. "Mr. Thompson," Prosecutor Jenkins asked, pacing in front of the jury, "why did you call security? Was Marcus Sterling actually being aggressive?" "No," Greg whispered, looking down at his hands. "Speak up, please, for the jury." "No," Greg said, his voice shaking. He was quiet. He was reading a book. He showed me his boarding pass. It was valid. "Then why?" Jenkins pressed. "Why did you initiate a removal protocol?" Greg looked at Cynthia, who was glaring at him from the defense table. He shuddered. "Because she told me to. Mrs. Reynolds. She said he didn't belong there. She threatened to call her husband and have me fired. In our airline. You don't say no to the Reynolds family. I was scared for my job." "So," Jenkins turned to the jury, "you prioritized a wealthy woman's prejudice over a passenger's civil rights?" "Yes," Greg wept. "I'm sorry." Next was Brad Lowe, the security guard. His testimony was short and brutal. He admitted that he never asked for ID. He admitted he assumed Marcus was a threat based on his hoodie and skin color. He admitted that Cynthia Reynolds was cheering him on while he twisted Marcus's arm. Then, finally, it was time for the star witness. When Marcus entered the courtroom, the air changed. He walked with a quiet, undeniable power. He wasn't wearing a hoodie today. He was wearing his official FBI dress uniform, the gold badge gleaming on his chest, his medals displayed perfectly. He took the oath and sat down. He didn't look at Cynthia. He looked at the jury. "Assistant Director Sterling," the defense attorney began, trying to find a crack in the armor. "Isn't it true that you could have de-escalated the situation sooner? You had a badge. Why didn't you flash it the second Mrs. Reynolds spoke to you?" It was a trap question, designed to make Marcus look arrogant. Marcus leaned into the microphone. His voice was deep, calm, and resonated through the silent room. "Counselor," Marcus said, "I am a black man in America. If I reach into my pocket too quickly in a tense situation, I don't get asked for ID. I get shot. I followed the procedure. I stated my seat number. I remained calm. I informed them I was a federal agent. I told them where my credentials were. They chose not to listen. They chose to see a threat where there was only a passenger. The silence that followed was heavy. One of the jurors wiped a tear from her eye. The defense attorney cleared his throat, shuffled his papers, and sat down. He had nothing. Against the advice of her public defender, Cynthia Reynolds insisted on taking the stand. She believed she could charm the jury. She believed she could explain that she was the real victim. It was a disaster. "Mrs. Reynolds?" Prosecutor Jenkins asked, her eyes sharp. "You heard Mr. Sterling say he was an agent. You heard him tell the security guard to check his jacket. Why did you continue to demand his removal?" "Because he was lying," Cynthia blurted out. "Look at him. He was wearing a hoodie. People like that don't sit in first class unless they're drug dealers or rappers. I was protecting the flight." The courtroom gasped. The judge's gavel banged loudly. "Order!" Judge Holloway shouted. Cynthia didn't stop. She stood up in the witness box, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "This is a setup. You're all against me because I'm rich. I am a platinum member. I pay your salaries. This is unfair. My husband will ruin all of you." "Sit down, Mrs. Reynolds," the judge roared. "No!" Cynthia screamed, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered hate. "He stole my seat. It was my seat." That outburst was the nail in the coffin. The jury didn't just see a criminal, they saw a person completely devoid of humanity. The jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. When they returned, they didn't look at the defense table. "We the jury," the foreman read, his voice steady, "find the defendant, Cynthia Reynolds, guilty on all counts. Count 1, interference with a flight crew. Guilty. Count 2, conspiracy to violate civil rights. Guilty. Count 3, inciting violence on an aircraft. Guilty. Count 4, making false statements to federal officers. Guilty." Cynthia slumped in her chair. She looked around for support. Her lawyer was packing his briefcase. The gallery was staring at her with cold indifference. Judge Holloway asked Cynthia to stand for sentencing. The judge was a woman known for her fairness, but today her eyes were hard as flint. "Mrs. Reynolds," Judge Holloway began, "throughout this trial I have looked for a shred of remorse. I have looked for a moment where you understood the gravity of what you did. I found none. You treated the law as an inconvenience and other human beings as obstacles." The judge adjusted her glasses. "You acted with a level of entitlement that is frankly a poison to our society. You destroyed the careers of the men who followed your illegal orders. You traumatized a cabin full of people, and you attempted to humiliate a man who has dedicated his life to protecting this country." "Please," Cynthia whispered. "I can't go to jail. I have anxiety." "Mr. Sterling had bruises on his spine," the judge retorted sharply. "He had handcuffs cutting into his wrists. Your anxiety is not the court's concern." The gavel raised. "Cynthia Reynolds, I sentence you to 52 months in a federal correctional institution. Following your release, you will serve 3 years of supervised probation. You are fined $250,000 to compensate for the disruption of commerce and police resources. Furthermore, you are placed on the federal no-fly list for life. You will never step foot on an airplane in the United States again." Bang! The sound of the gavel was final. 2 U.S. Marshals moved in. They didn't use the gentle touch. They pulled Cynthia's arms behind her back. "Ouch! You're hurting me!" she cried. "Stop resisting," the marshal said. The exact same words Brad, the security guard, had used on Marcus. The karma had come full circle. 3 months into her sentence at the Coleman Federal Correctional Complex, Cynthia was assigned to laundry duty. It was back-breaking work, folding rough sheets and scrubbing uniforms for 12 cents an hour. It was break time. The inmates were gathered around a small television bolted to the wall in the common room. "Hey, new girl," an inmate named Juarez called out. "Isn't that your husband?" Cynthia dropped the towel she was holding and rushed to the TV. It was a news report on CNN. The headline read, "Logistics Tycoon, Richard Reynolds indicted for fraud." On the screen, Richard Reynolds was being led out of his mansion in handcuffs by the FBI. But that wasn't the worst part. Standing in the background, talking to the press, was Marcus Sterling. The reporter's voiceover played. Following the viral airport incident, an FBI investigation into the Reynolds family finances revealed a decade-long scheme of tax evasion and bribery used to secure government contracts. The investigation, spearheaded by Assistant Director Marcus Sterling's division, has led to the seizure of all Reynolds family assets. Cynthia watched in horror. Her mansion, her cars, the money she thought would be waiting for her when she got out. It was all gone. The scene on the TV cut to a press conference. Marcus Sterling stood at a podium. He looked dignified, serious. "Justice is not a weapon for the rich," Marcus told the cameras. "It is a shield for the innocent. Today we recovered $12 million in stolen assets. In accordance with federal seizure laws, a portion of these funds will be redirected to community programs." Marcus paused, and for a second he looked directly into the camera lens. It felt like he was looking right through the TV screen, into the prison common room, right at Cynthia. "We are donating the initial seized amount to the Sterling Initiative, a scholarship fund for underprivileged students who want to study law and criminal justice. We are turning a legacy of greed into a future of fairness." Cynthia stared at the screen. Her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the cold linoleum floor of the prison laundry room. She had lost her freedom. She had lost her husband. She had lost her fortune. And now, the money she used to hoard was being used to train a new generation of people like Marcus Sterling. The inmate named Juarez looked down at Cynthia and laughed. "Damn Blondie," Juarez said, shaking her head. "That isn't just karma, that's an act of God." Cynthia curled into a ball and wept, the sound lost in the hum of the washing machines. She finally realized the truth. She had tried to drag a man off a plane, but in the end, she was the one who had been dragged into the light and burned by it. And that is how Cynthia Reynolds went from sipping champagne in first class to drinking tap water in a federal prison cell. She thought her money made her invincible, but she forgot that in the eyes of the law, and especially in the eyes of the FBI, justice is the only currency that matters. Marcus Sterling proved that true power isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the one who knows when to stay quiet and let the trap snap shut. It's a brutal lesson in hard karma. The higher you hold your nose in the air, the harder you hit the ground when you fall. What would you have done if you were in Marcus's seat? Would you have shown the badge earlier, or would you have let them dig their own grave just like he did? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story about entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.